The Innova is arguably one of the most popular and recognizable nameplates, not just in Toyota's local lineup, but across the entire automotive industry. It was touted by many as one of the most practical, reliable, and sensible vehicles to ever hit the market. That's why its successor, the all-new Zenix, has some pretty big shoes to fill. Is it up to the task? The Zenix we're driving today is the Hybrid. This is the top of the line trim in the Zenix lineup. This is powered by a 2-liter gasoline engine that's mated to an electric motor. Total system output is at 183 horsepower. So a few things here. If you're not familiar with Toyota's hybrid system, all you need to know is that there's nothing much to know. It's a self-charging hybrid. You don't need to worry about it. It just charges on its own and it shifts from gasoline to electric motor automatically, whether you're in traffic or you're cruising along the highway. There's really not much to it. You just gas up and go, and you drive it as you would any normal vehicle. But if you really want to dive into it, the way it works is that there is a hybrid battery powering the electric motor. The electric motor then can work on its own or hand in hand with the gasoline engine to propel the Zenix forward. Now, the battery charges when you're driving or through regenerative braking, so there will still be some benefits through that stop-and-go traffic when you're stuck in Metro Manila. Now, as I mentioned, it can run solely using the electric motor, and you have the EV mode button for that. You can override and select the EV mode, but it will not activate if there's not enough juice left in the battery. And again, as I mentioned, it can shift automatically. So when you're cruising, say at 50 kilometers per hour and there's enough charge, you'll see the EV icon pop up, and that means you're running solely using battery power. And if you don't want to get too technical, well, you can just ignore these and just drive it as it is. And you'll feel that hybrid system working when you look at the fuel economy gauge. Because when I was driving this, I have been driving this for more than 400 kilometers, and over the course of the first 200 kilometers, I was stuck in stop-and-go traffic, and I was driving on the highway, and in mixed conditions, I got a solid 18 kilometers per liter. I'm sure I could have done better than that because I didn't just use eco mode. For parts of the drive, I did use power mode. And speaking of which, there are 3 available. There's eco, power, and normal mode, which you can select using this drive mode button here near the gear shifter. But as I have experienced during my time with this, eco mode is for the most part more than enough. I was only using power mode when I was through steep inclines and I had a lot of passengers on board. But if I was just driving on the highway or of course through city streets, I just stuck to eco mode and it worked perfectly fine for me. And again, as I said, fuel economy figures were great. But apart from the fuel economy, one thing that really improved in the new Zenix, it's just a lot easier to drive now. It doesn't feel truckish anymore. The old Innova was closer to a Fortuner than it was to, say, a Veloz. The steering felt a bit heavy, the ride wasn't as plush, but now it's just so easy to maneuver. And of course, overall ride comfort is now so much better because you don't have that diesel engine up front, so the vibrations are reduced and NVH levels, for the most part, are kept to a minimum inside this cabin. So it really is a very pleasant car to be in, whether you're on the highway or in the city. Now, as I said, this is a lot easier to drive, but it probably isn't as fun as the old Innova in terms of power because that old 2.8 liter turbo diesel just pulls. Don't expect the same performance from this one. That being said, you're not buying a Zenix anyway, you're not buying a 7-seater MPV for that matter, for sportiness or just raw power. That being said, if I were to choose, I wouldn't want to be driving this one that often. I would rather be a passenger in the back, as what Charles is doing right now, our videographer, who is already falling asleep in the captain's seats. The interior is a bigger upgrade from the old Innova. The Zenix has this premium looking cabin, and while it doesn't have all these leather bits and soft touch materials, it does look pleasing to the eye. It's clad in black with some hints of brown and some silver trim, and it has a contrasting roof liner that also looks pretty good. Another thing you'll notice here is that there are a lot of buttons. That's because Toyota has upgraded the entire Zenix package with all these amenities. On the steering wheel, you'll find buttons for the adaptive cruise control, the controls for the digital instrument cluster, and over here you have this digital display for the AC controls, which has still tactile buttons, which is always a bonus for me. And underneath you have these buttons for the hybrid system, which we will dive into a bit later. And over here, you also have a USB-A and USB-C charging port with the 12-volt socket found in front of the passenger seat. As for storage space, you do have a small cubby here, and you have a large storage space underneath the center armrest. As with any other Toyota, you have a lot of cup holders here. You have two in the middle, you have one on either side, and bottle holders on both doors. Before we move on to the back, I'll just point out a few quirks here. So when I was using this at first, I was trying to look for the controls for the trip meters. And I was wondering why it only showed the odometer and I couldn't find trip A and trip B. The problem was the controls weren't here. It had a button here, just like back in the old days, I suppose. So yes, you do still have multiple trip meters in the Zenix. Another is that this thing is pretty hard to adjust. Not that it's that big of a deal because you won't be moving around your rear view mirror that often anyway, but still it's something worth pointing out. Oh, and of course, before we forget, this infotainment system. You have this floating display here. It's large and it has a clear display, and it's also pretty responsive. It has both Android Auto and wireless Apple CarPlay connectivity, and the sound it produces through the speaker system is pretty good. But there is a but. At one point when I was driving, it kind of conked out on me. I actually have footage of this. I'm going to show this to you right here. Call has been in progress for 23 minutes. I put it down 15 minutes ago. And it's still in Apple CarPlay supposedly. Well, this is the cable. My phone is unplugged, so I don't know what's going on here. After that call with Mr. Tamayo, I had to reset the car just to get the infotainment system working properly again. It didn't happen again, but the fact that it happened at least once is also worth pointing out, I suppose. Now, I'm here in the second row, and these are arguably the best seats in the house. But before we dive into all this, I just have to note that there is a lack of grab bars on both sides, and there are no step boards in the Zenix, so getting inside or even getting out may be a bit difficult, especially for elderly or not so tall passengers. But once you do get inside, you do have a lot of amenities here. You have separate controls for the rear AC, you have two USB-C charging ports here at the bottom, and of course AC vents, 4 AC vents in total here at the back. You have cabin lights, and you have ambient lighting here, which can be adjusted from the front seat or using this small paddle here. And of course, you do have these very, very comfortable captain seats with armrests and ottomans. And in the middle, you have this small table with 2 cup holders. Comes in very, very handy. Add to that, you have this tunnel here, so you can put some of your stuff here in the middle. There's still a lot of space to go around here, even if you're seated at the back. But anyway, it feels like a cheat code when you're here in the middle, so let's move on to the back. I'm here in the third row, and it's actually very comfortable here. I've said it before and I'll say it again. This is so much better than in the old Innova. Apart from the fact that these seats actually fold flat on the floor. Now, unlike in the old Innova where you had to hang them on the grab bars here, you actually have a lot of legroom here because the floor isn't as high as it was before. Back then, you'd probably have your feet like this in this seating position, but now you can sit comfortably even if you're a full-sized adult. This seat in front of me is positioned pretty generously, so the passenger in front will still have a lot of leg room, probably not enough to bring up the ottomans, but still enough to move around and then some. And yet, I still have this much leg room here for me. Ngayon, medyo masakit yung tuhod ko today, so I can't sit properly here, but I can show you that I still have a lot of space to work with here. Now, you still have some amenities here as well. You have your own AC vents for both passengers. You have a 12-volt socket here on the left side, and you have 2 cup holders on either side, as well as small cubbies for your phones, for wallets, for small stuff. So in a nutshell, the third row passengers weren't left behind in the Zenix. But one thing I do have to note is that a third passenger here at the back, or basically a seventh passenger, might not be a good idea. One good bonus here, which you might have noticed earlier though, is you have a lever here at the back of the second row seat so you can adjust them from behind. So if those passengers are bugging you, you can just kick them forward. The Zenix still looks very much like an Innova still. It's got a similar silhouette, it's got similar design cues, only this one has grown bigger. It looks much bigger than before. Up front, you have this large trapezoidal-like grille with its mesh-like pattern enclosed in this chrome trim and these sleek-looking headlamps. You can find black plastic claddings here at the bumper enclosing these horizontal DRLs, and more of those can be found underneath these undercladdings that wrap around the vehicle. At the rear, you'll see more design changes. In the past generation models, Toyota used those protruding tail lights that you'll find in the old Innova and in the old RAV4. In this next generation model, it looks a bit tamer, a lot cleaner. It's got a flat-looking liftgate with the tail lights sweeping back to the C-pillar, and it has this chrome trim up top. Overall, actually, I like it better. But one thing you'll notice here, apart from, of course, the hybrid badge on the other side, is this Innova badge. Probably to remind us that this is still the Innova despite us calling it the Zenix now. Now, since we're already here at the back, let me show you the trunk. It's got a power liftgate, by the way. So this is how much space you're looking at. And that's with all 3 rows being used. You have some space for a few boxes, some cargo, and if you do have a larger bag with you, you can just adjust the third row seats accordingly. So, pretty decent. Clearly, the Zenix is just a much better vehicle than the Innova, by far. This looks cleaner, it has a better interior, it has more space for its passengers, and it's just a lot easier to drive. And to top all that, it's just much more fuel efficient. And it's a pretty solid deal at just 1,953,000 pesos. So, is it a worthy successor to the mighty Innova? Hell yeah, it is. And if I were to give this a score, well, it's not perfect, but it is sort of the closest thing you can get to the perfect family car. So I'm gonna give it a solid 9.5 out of 10.